Hello students, welcome to EPG Patashala. I am Dr. Basu Prabhujirli from Banaras Hindu University. Today, we are going to talk on a module, History of Extension Services in the post-independence era as a part 2. Under this program, we will be discussing two basic programs, that is Community Development Program and the Panchayat Raj. These are the components of the paper, Concept and Dimension of Extension Education. The objective of this particular module is, as I said, there are two basic programs that we are going to discuss, that is Community Development Program and Panchayat Raj system. The objective is to realize the importance of people's participation in developmental initiatives. Until and unless people participate for whom the initiative is meant for, we cannot observe any changes in the society. With this premise that we are working upon. In the previous part, we have observed 6 different programs wherein the effort was made to influence the behavior of the people for participation, for inculcating the desirable changes in their behavior, and all these efforts were aiming at bringing in the socio-economic changes. So, putting these things under the heading of the Planning Commission's summary, we can say that why the programs that we planned and implemented in the first part of the post-independence efforts did not yielding good amount of results as anticipated. So, there were certain reasons. So, Planning Commission made an effort to consolidate these reasons and I am presenting before you. Majority of the schemes were of short duration, obviously, because we were not having an assessment of to what extent that it can be taken up and where it should be and where it should not be implemented. But we wanted to see the change and we wanted to see the people's participation, ensure people's participation, hence we went for the shorter duration. The activities were not properly planned and implemented. Obviously, there was no institutional support for planning and implementation of all these developmental initiatives. And hence, in the fag end of the part 1, we discussed about the Planning Commission, and that also is now reframed as Policy Commission, NITI. And it is a continuous process. But at that point of time, we did not have appropriate institutional support, hence there was problem in case of planning as well as in case of implementation. Initiative came from either from the government or a few individuals, but not from the people. This particular point is very, very important from the perspective of development. Why it is so? These programs are supposed to be more of supply driven rather than demand driven. So, government want to supply development for the benefit of people, but is it expected? Rather, there should be demand from the people, then there should be supply from the government side or any of the institution for that matter, then we can see the holistic change. The classical example that we can remember at this juncture is the Nilokeri experiment. It was totally demand driven. Every individual who was displaced from Pakistan was in need of the support from the government, and government did it and they changed themselves. It is not happening in this part of the country because we are having a sense of complacency that is very, very dangerous for the development. So, that is why the Planning Commission identified that yes, the government is from the initiative is from the government or a group of individuals who perceive certain amount of change in the society, but the needed people did not demand for that. So, that was one of the major lacuna. The basic problems like rural credit, land tenure, etc. were not at all touched upon by these developmental initiatives. That is another important concern what we have. Keeping all these observations of the Planning Commission and the experiences that were gained out of the previous experiments, one ambitious program by the Government of India was planned, and that was implemented on 2nd October in the year 1952. The name of that program is the Community Development Program. At the outset, the thing that is coming to our mind is we are going to bring certain changes in the community. This is what is community development. What are those changes that we are intended, and what are those changes the community is in need of? So, these were some of the issues that were addressed. Now, coming to how we can understand this concept of community development, because this particular program of community development, it is not only limited to India. Similar programs were implemented in other parts of the world also, especially where the development was essential or where the development was needed. In those underprivileged area, community development program was also implemented, but in Indian context, it was planned in 1952. United Nations defined the concept of community development as the process by which people, efforts of the people themselves are united with those of the governmental authorities. This is first part of the definition. I need your attention in this part of the definition. Let me read it once again. The efforts of the people themselves are united with those of the governmental authorities. For what? To improve the socio-economic and social and cultural conditions of the communities, to integrate these communities into the life of the nation, and to enable them to contribute fully for the national progress. As I said, this definition can be divided into two different parts. The first part, which is emphasizing on the methodology, that is efforts of the people in combination with the governmental efforts. When these two things come together, then only we can see the second part of this definition, which is talking of development in different sectors like social, economic, cultural, so on and so forth. The first part, is it that easy to implement? Government is making initiative from its side, and this is what has figured in the reports of the Planning Commission also. Government is throwing good number of programs for bringing in the changes and the development. But what is the reaction of the society? That is what is the people's effort. That is what is the people's effort. So, if at all they come together under one umbrella, and if people's effort and the governmental effort are joining together, then immediately we can see certain changes, and this is what is happening in different parts of the country. If I ask you, under Indian conditions, there are certain states which we can identify them as the developed states. You can easily count the name of few states. Why it is so? In other parts of the country, we say that it is not developed, it is underdeveloped. There are so many such synonyms that we cannot touch. Again, why it is so? Is it that government is paying more attention to some parts of the country and it is not at all paying to some other parts of the country? It is not. Government pays equal amount of attention to all these states, but some parts of the country or some districts or some parts of the country are implementing the programs as it is desired of. but in some other parts it is not happening, and that is why we are trying to classify it as not developed or underdeveloped or underprivileged, so on and so forth. So, in the beginning itself, I have been telling that participation is key for development. This is how we are going to understand how the involvement of the people is going to change the scenario. Coming to the second definition given by Mukherjee in the year 1967 to understand the concept of community development. He says that it is a process of change from traditional way of living of rural communities to the progressive ways of living, as a method by which people can be assisted to develop themselves on their own capacity and resources, as a program concerning the welfare of the rural people, and as a movement for progress with certain ideological content. Various things are involved in this particular definition also. What is that? In the first part of the definition, he says that community development is a process of moving from traditional way of living to the progressive ways of living. How do we understand this traditional and progressive way of living? Is it that if we change our food habits, it is going to be identified as a progressive ways of living? Or is it that if we change our dressing pattern, it is going to be the progressive ways of living? No. We need to change our knowledge, we need to change our skills, we need to change our attitudes, and we need to accept the changes as and when it is essential. That is what is the meaning of progressive ways of living. So, once we accept these things, so then we can see certain changes, and that change, what again it is referred in the last part of the definition, that change should be with certain ideological content. This ideological content is going to refer to that particular aspect without modifying or influencing the existing culture. You need to improve upon the various factors like social factors or economic factors or the technological factors. So, that is how the concept of community development is coming into the picture. Till now, we were understanding the concept of community development with the help of two definitions. I hope you are clear about the concept of community development. Coming to the objectives of community development. How the definition can be implemented to achieve the aims of achieving the change in living standards of people. The objectives are the expression of the ends towards which all the efforts are directed. The objectives of the community development include the first one, to assist each village in having effective panchayat, cooperative and schools. These are the three basic institutions that we come across for ensuring development. The second objective was, through these institutions, plan and carry out integrated, multi-phased family, village, block and district plans for increasing agricultural production, for improving the cottage industries, for providing health care and educational facilities, for providing programs for village women and youth. The objectives reveal the importance of the basic institutions at grassroots level. Once the grassroots institutions are strengthened, the development is bound to follow. It is the same institution that we refer to as the basic institutions in sociological studies. Panchayats represent the political institution, which is the key to consolidate the demands of the community. Once the community consolidates the needs, then it brings the commitment in its implementation and motivating people. Cooperatives are the economic institutions which help in maximization of profits of the community. If an individual bargains in the market for a better price as a primary producer, he may or may not get better price. But when you are bargaining collectively, you are bound to get the better price. Looking into the typical production scenario of India, cooperatives are the best possible options for small and medium producers. After understanding the objectives of community development, now let us move on to the steps in community development program. Over a long period of experimentation, many researchers came out with various steps and processes of community development. The steps suggested by Dwarakinath in the year 1967 enlisted the most acceptable and practical steps for planning implementation of community development program. The steps include identification of need, that is the first and foremost step. Until unless you identify the needs of the target group, you cannot build upon the program of development. Based on the needs, the second step reveals that setting of the objectives. The setting of objectives is totally based on the needs of the communities. The third step of community development program is assessing the resources. After setting of the objectives, we are trying to identify whether we have sufficient resources at our disposal to achieve the objectives. If yes, it is well and good. If the resources are in and around us, we are going to make use of that. If not, how and from where we can get these resources, that will be planned and carried out in case of assessment of the resources. The fourth step includes considering the alternatives. So, what if we are not having the resources, or if we are not able to have an access to these resources, will be decided under the step of considering the alternatives. If the resources are not available, or if any of the input is not available, there are good number of alternatives or the contingency plans that we can think of. That is what is the basic idea here. Based on this, as a sixth step of community development program, we are going to make the decision. That is what is the next step. This is going to be the action plan and how we are going to realize the concept of development. That is what is the process of making the decision. Providing leadership is how we are going to implement this particular action plan. So that is what is the process that we are going to decide in the form of providing leadership. Taking action, so that is the next step, which deals with taking this particular program or any of the initiative that we have thought of to the ultimate beneficiary. So that's what is the meaning of taking action. And the last step, which is very, very, very important, is being capable of solving other problems of the community. So it represents the ability of the member of a community who should develop his capacity to solve the other problems of the community. That is what is the basic idea here. The last step, as we said now, of the community development program, as reported by Dwarakinath, reveals the development agenda of the development and commitment of the government regarding the human resource development. The agenda is building capacity of each and every individual so that he can become capable of solving the other problems of the community. If it becomes a reality, then there will not be any problem in the society. But to reach to this point, there are various other things that we need to take up. Now, moving on to the implementation part of the community development program. What was the operational area and what was the structure that was available for implementation of this community development program? Each community development program had an operational area of about 400 to 500 square miles. The said area used to cover about 300 villages with a population of about 2 lakhs in those days. To begin with, 55 community development projects were established and later it was extended to other parts of the country also. Each community development program was headed by a project officer covering 3 development blocks, and each block is headed by a block development officer, popularly known as BDO. I hope you remember in those days of community development program, BDO used to be the most strongest extension officer, and he is the most powerful extension officer because the all developmental initiatives, the programs, the projects were implemented through block development officer only. Even today, the post exists. The BDOs are supported by a range of extension officers, and at grassroots level, there are village level extension workers for a cluster of 5 to 10 villages. The village level extension worker is the basic organic linkage between the community and the government machinery. He was a multi-purpose extension worker under this particular program. The basic issue that was faced by this particular program was because the grassroots level extension worker was of multi-purpose in nature. With the element of development in the village, the expectation of the people started rising. They wanted to know more about agriculture, they wanted to know more about health, they wanted to know more about cottage industry, so on and so forth. But the service provider was one village level extension worker with minimum qualifications. He was not able to deliver much goods to the society, and that is how it became an hindering factor, which we will see in case of training and visit system. The corrections were modified, the corrections were introduced, and highly professional extension workers were provided under training and visit system. Friends, after understanding the steps and processes of a community development program, now let us move on to the critical analysis of this community development program, because many efforts were done to make this particular program a success. But still, with all these efforts, there were some lacunae of this particular program. That is what were identified at the end of this particular program. We will try to identify them one by one. The first point that emerged as a part of this critical analysis was the government personnel assumed the responsibility of determining the needs of the villagers and also prescribed how these needs should be and could be met. The first step of this community development program, as we said, analysis of the needs. So, instead of analyzing the needs from the grassroots, the personnel felt that I am aware of the needs of this particular section of the society. That was the greatest mistake that we did during that program. In many such programs, especially the developmental initiatives, the people working in that sector feel that I am aware of what they are in need of. But in reality, there is a huge gap what they are in need of and what we are supplying. And this is what had happened in case of community development program. And apart from that, they also prescribed how these needs should be and could be met, rather than asking the communities. We are talking of top down and bottom up. How can it become bottom up approach when we are dictating the terms from the top? This is what had happened there. So, that is first lacuna that what we are observing in case of this program. Because of the thing that we discussed so far, the village leaders were having difficult time to mobilize people, because everything was forced upon you, it was imposed upon to you. So, there was no motivation among the society. There was no motivation among the society, and village leaders were struggling or trying their best to motivate the people, but because they did not listen, then they started facing the problem. The third important issue was the local group dynamics was totally neglected. The village societies are having a typical social structure. They value the value systems, the norms of the society, taboos, mores. There are so many such things that exist in the village, and even today we find the existence of all these cultural aspects in the village communities. Even though in the urban societies it is not that obvious, but in rural societies it is obvious even today in the 21st century. That dynamics of the village societies was totally neglected under this program. So, that is one of the important issue to be considered. The next point was the village level workers were prepared to render assistance to the people, but least prepared to stimulate the group action. In analysis of almost all developmental initiatives, especially in case of agriculture and allied sector, this particular finding is almost common to all the developmental initiatives. What is that? The developmental workers or the extension workers who are in this particular sector are loaded with good number of technological issues, but they are lacking the training on extension methodologies. There are good number of issues, how you can approach the people, how you can influence the people, how you can motivate the people, how you can organize the group. There are various issues. In one of the earlier points we said that it is group dynamics, then again it is the issue dealt by the extension education. So, the basic thing is the inputs of extension were not given much attention. The most important thing was the technology. So, that is why there was certain problem in implementation of this program. Then coming to the last but not the least point, very important point, too many obligations like regular record keeping, submission of reports, etc. reduced the time to be spared for the extension activities by the extension workers. Yes, these are the official procedures. Sometimes we feel that they are going to be the burden, but when we give much emphasis on this paperwork, definitely the other part is going to be influenced, and that is what had happened in case of community development program also. Looking into the response of the community, in spite of drawbacks mentioned in the aforesaid paragraphs or in the aforesaid discussion, there was enthusiasm among the community. Hence, to cover more area under community development program with the less cost and more people's participation, the program was extended as the National Extension Service in the year 1953. Basically, the modus operandi that what we adopted in case of community development program remains same, but the NES is having an element of expansion so that more area is covered under the umbrella of community development program. Because of that, there were slight modifications that were introduced in this particular program, and it was implemented in 1953. In the year 1954, the momentum gained by National Extension Service was intensified by converting the most successful NES blocks into community development blocks. And there were a good number of incentives that were provided to this community development blocks. The idea behind was to identify the best performing NES blocks or the National Extension Service blocks and provide them with the additional staff, additional financial support so that it can work in a more efficient manner. All these efforts were acting as additional oxygen support to sustain and to have additional progress in those areas. Learning lessons from community development program, it was established that people's participation is must in development programs. If ultimate stakeholders are not involved in planning, implementation and evaluation phase, we cannot think of holistic development. But the gigantic question was how to involve the end users in all these processes. To address this issue, Government of India appointed a committee under the leadership of Shri Balwantri G. Mehta, which submitted its report in 1957, which paved the way for establishment of Panchayat Raj system in the country. The recommendations of the committee included establishment of Panchayat, number one, so that we can have a grassroots level institution in the village itself. The second recommendation was entrusting the planning developmental activities to these panchayats, so that the issue that we were discussing in our previous modules, the bottom-up approach or the involvement of the ultimate stakeholders in the process of planning was made reality with this recommendation. Then the third recommendation was transfer of adequate resources to discharge duties. All these developmental initiatives need good amount of financial resources. Hence, he was emphasizing upon the financial freedom to the grassroots level institutions in the form of transferring adequate resources so that they can discharge duties for the cause of development. Panchayat is a three-tier structure involving Gram Panchayat at village level, Panchayat Samiti or Taluka Panchayat at Tehsil level or Taluka level, and Zilla Panchayat at district level, which is the highest policy making body. Each level will be having a group of elected representatives. These elected representatives are responsible for planning, implementation, and evaluation of development activities in their respective constituencies. Each constituency is the geographical area covered by each representative. For the purpose, each village is divided into different wards, and each ward is having a fixed population, will be having an elected representative. A group of such elected representatives will be headed by a Gram Pradhan or Sarpanch. Nomenclature varies from state to state. It means each village is having a local self-government to plan and implement and evaluate the program, the developmental initiatives in that particular village. The journey of Panchayat Raj system since its implementation, that is 1957 to 1992, can be divided into three distinctive phases. The concept has seen many problems as well as ups and downs during the period. Hence, it is broadly divided into three different phases. The first one, the phase of ascendancy, 1957 to 1964. The phase of stagnation, 1965 to 1969. The phase of decline, 1969 to 1977. The first phase has seen very enthusiastic response from the people as well as government, since it was of the first of its kind program, wherein people wanted to take active part and be the carriers of development process. The second phase was one of the most disappointing phase for the development initiatives. The phase is identified as a stagnation phase. In the earlier part of our discussion, we have seen that there was a phase of stagnation as well as decline in case of Panchayat Raj system. The reasons behind the stagnation as well as the decline stage include: number one, the rural development programs were kept out of the purview of Panchayat Raj institutions. The basic purpose of Panchayat Raj was defeated with this particular process, since the established government institutions were not much successful in ensuring the development at village level. The concept was brought in, but the authorities responsible again brought in the barriers in the process. Hence, there was stagnation. The second reason that was quoted include reduced fund allocation. In the recommendation of the committee, it was clearly spelled out that allocation of sufficient funds to take up development programs. Since it was not practiced, there was stagnation. Without financial support, how can we ensure development? That is the main issue for stagnation. The third reason for this thing was lack of adjustment of bureaucracy with the Panchayat Raj institutions. This seems to be the root cause of all the reasons at stagnation phase. Since the power was transferred to the people's representatives, the bureaucracy could not digest this particular development. And there was totally no cooperation from bureaucracy to the Panchayat Raj institutions. Initially, even the government could not understand the issue. Hence, there was perceived need for comprehensive modification in the Panchayat Raj system. The fourth reason that was quoted for stagnation and decline was the lack of political will. This is key for underdevelopment or no development. On the contrary, if there exists political will, we can see the change within no time. This is how we see some changes in some places where the local and the regional politicians are highly active. On the other hand, if the local politicians are not active, there we will not see any change. Even though the government allocates the fund for all the regions equally, we see the regional variations as far as development is considered. The fifth reason and the most important reason quoted for stagnation and declining stage include the other impacts of lack of political will is postponement of the panchayat elections in some states and suspension of Panchayat Raj institutions in some other states. Because of which, people started losing interest in the Panchayat Raj institutions. Again, bureaucracy gained the moment under such developments. The sixth reason quoted was the prime reason for decline of Panchayat Raj institution was lack of conceptual clarity about the Panchayat Raj institutions and its objectives. After more than a decade of implementation of Panchayat Raj institutions, if the people responsible are having lack of conceptual clarity, how can the concept work successfully? So that is how there was totally a decline in the process of implementation of Panchayat Raj system for ensuring the development. Looking into the analysis of the Government of India brought constitutional amendment under the 72nd Amendment to the Constitution in the year 1992. There were major amendments to the Constitution as far as the Panchayat Raj institutions are considered. These amendments gained the momentum again in the country and grassroots level development became a reality. Since then, because of the 72nd Amendment to the Constitution and the entire process of the Panchayat Raj institution was changed. Since then, it became mandatory for all states to conduct timely elections, to allocate sufficient resources, and all the problems what we faced that under the heading of the stagnation and the declining stage of Panchayat Raj were overcome with this particular process over a period of time. Now, almost every state in India is having the Panchayat Raj institutions running very successfully, and the dream of transferring the powers to the local institutions has become a reality. So students, we discussed so far two important programs, that is Community Development Program and the Panchayat Raj institution. Both these programs were such programs which were experimented on people's participation at grassroots level for ensuring development. So, when we go through the contents or when we recall the contents of these two programs, how to involve the ultimate beneficiary, because in the process of development we need to consider them as one of the important stakeholders. In many of the developmental initiatives, this particular aspect found to be missing, but that was inseparable component of these two programs. That is, we try to identify the people's participation as one of the important stakeholders. The process of development is a continuous journey. We need to learn from our own previous mistakes and make necessary modifications in the approach and involve the community for holistic development. Then we can see the desired change in the society and the holistic development that we have been talking of.